The Chalke History Festival special series on history with Jackson.
Hello and welcome to the Chalke History Festival special series here on History Jackson, and here we are joined by Jonathan Sumption. How are you doing?
I'm all right, thanks.
Yeah. I'm really excited to talk to you about some of the work you're doing here at Chalke. But I wanted to ask you firstly, what inspired you to have this talk with Ali and to write this book on democracy?
I've been interested in the subject ever since I was a judge, concerned mainly with questions of public law, the powers of government and so on, which seemed to me to be part of a much broader issue which judges hardly ever have to deal with, namely what makes laws legitimate, what makes them democratic, and what makes them cease to be democratic.
Why do you think it's particularly important now in this historical moment to be safeguarding it?
Well, at the moment, we have a democratic world in which democracy no longer commands the confidence of a large proportion of the electorate, in particular of the younger electorate. There are a lot of quite complex reasons for that. It's about disappointed expectations, and it's about the basic injustice of the distribution of wealth and power against the interests of the young, who have a relatively raw deal. Those, I think, are two of the quite complicated interlocking factors that have led to a state of affairs where, according to some polls, a clear majority of the population of this country would like to be ruled by a strong man. And we are witnessing across the Atlantic a country with a long democratic history, which has turned into a laboratory of the mechanics of democratic decline.
And who do you think's on the front lines for defending this? Because if we have the young favouring a strong man, there needs to be people on the front line trying to prevent that from happening.
Well, I'm trying to do that myself, but I'm not alone. And the more people realise, the first things that you've got to do is understand what's going on and why. And that's actually a bigger problem than you might think. People take democracy for granted. One advantage of what's happened in Trumpland is that it has actually brought home to people that democracies are relatively fragile, and you've got to be prepared to enjoy the alternative if you want a strong man. That can be pretty unattractive.
And this process of authoritarianisation with that democratic decline, how do you see it beginning?
I think it begins very gradually, which is why it hasn't been noticed until quite recently. It begins with a generalised dissatisfaction with the way the world works, and it begins with a feeling that if politics aren't going your way, you need to adopt some non-political way of getting your way, and that can be anything from litigation, it can be direct action, or it can be resort to a demagogue. The latter is a much more dangerous fate for any society because it is much more difficult to reverse.
And with this decline and some of the threats you were talking about, particularly the rise of demagogues, there also seems to be a rise of racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia with that.
Well, those are much older vices, and I think that they are. The connection isn't actually that close. I mean, anti-Semitism is centuries old, and I don't think there's any reason to believe that it's more significant now than it was in the past. It's always been significant. It's always been there.
And then what can we do in our everyday lives to help?
Well, one thing that we can do is think when we vote about the interests of people other than ourselves and people like us. Another thing that we can do is to expect less of the state, because there are many things that the state can't do, or can't do well, or can't do except at the expense of other really important values. And the root cause of a lot of our problems is that we are expecting the state to do more than it can sensibly do. And when we are inevitably disappointed by the result, we tend to turn to other ways, undemocratic ways of getting our way. We've got to recognise that in a democracy we're not always going to get our way. There are other people with different views and different interests who have to be taken into account.
I think that's a really nice note for people to try and remember, is that things don't, as you said, things don't go the way that everyone wants them, but that is the democratic process. Now, I think that's a nice time for us to go to our final fun question, as we do it at the end of every podcast.
Right.
Who is the figure that you enjoy studying the most in history?
Goodness. That's a rather large question, and it's a different person every time I think about it. For present purposes, I think the most relevant one is Thomas Hobbes, a great political philosopher, a master of the English language, somebody whose reasoning most people quite rightly find repellent, but most people find it very difficult to argue with. That he was an extraordinary master of the dialectics of persuasion. You end up finding that you followed him, a chain of logic, and found yourself in a place you didn't want to be. That's a sobering experience.
I think that's a really nice answer. Well, thank you very much for coming.
The Chalke History Festival special series on history with Jackson.